Welcome back. Ruben Tech reporting from Bizarro Land as President Donald J. Trump gave an unhinged presser a few days ago. So unhinged, I decided to wait a few days to see if any details would be released, but of course, none were. Trump's administration is famous for being light on details. As you know, he likes to shoot from the hip, which I can't blame him for because whenever I read a script on this channel, people quickly comment down below, you are terrible at reading from a script, so I've given up on it. However, that's neither here or there. We're here to discuss what this presser was about and why it has finally forced Beijing to come out and say enough is enough. But first, I want to welcome you to Ruben Tech, where we discuss the intersection of tech, politics, and finance. Today, we're going to be hitting all three, essentially, and I want to remind you, please hit that like and subscribe button down below. We're on our way to 10,000 subscribers. Okay, so what was it that he announced? President Trump, I'm going to try to be respectful here. It's very hard, okay? Went up in a presser and he announced a 15% tax on all of Nvidia's H20 and AMD's MI308 chip sales into China. Now, I call it a tax, but we know it's not a tax because President Donald Trump's administration right now is being sued in court over the tariffs because taxes must be enacted by Congress. And people suing him are saying these are taxes. And President Donald J. Trump's administration is fighting back in the lawsuits and saying, no, they aren't. Tariffs aren't taxes, thus he can do it. But what you get from that logic then is that at least in this lawsuit, they are acknowledging that President Donald J. Trump does not have the power to just willy-nilly turn on a tax. Okay, so if this isn't a tax, what is it? Is it a tariff? No, a tariff is on an import. This is an export, right? So this is an export into China. I mean, I guess in some way, maybe you could tariff an export. I don't know. I don't think you can. So, no, that wouldn't make sense. It would go completely against the idea. So it's not a tariff. But what we do know is that these chips are on the U.S. sanctions list. Back in April, Trump made the announcement that the H20s were going to be put on this list along with the MI308s. Nvidia took immediately a $5 billion write-down. Terrible, terrible news for them. Had to take another $1.5 billion later on. And so we know these chips are on the sanctions list. And so, as I said, his administration has released no legal details. There's no written anything about this, and nobody really seems to know. But from what I would gather, based on the fact that they're on the sanction list and that you have to apply for a sanction license, and they did mention that in some circles that Nvidia and AMD will be granted a license, is that this is a licensing fee. However, those are typically one-time fees, not this that is structured like a tax. So from here on out, I'm just going to call it a tax, okay? And it's so very unusual. I mean, that's where it's like bizarro world, because at least in America, we don't typically do things like this. Like, our income tax is based on what income you make. So for instance, you know, what I make, if my neighbor makes a similar amount, we're going to pay the same amount. They don't say, Ruben, you pay this, and you know, my neighbor, you pay that. They say, you know, you're both in the same relative income, you follow the same rules, okay? Government does the same, and they go to level. So if you're Bill Gates, you're probably under the same level as, say, Elon Musk, okay? So it goes by income. Sales tax goes by the goods. You buying retail goods in Wisconsin, that's a 5.5% flat sales tax. Doesn't matter if you're buying, you know, this potted plant down here, or if you're buying, you know, I don't know, a pair of pants. So if I go to Quick Trip and I fill up my car with gas, I pay a gas tax, okay? Doesn't matter if I go to Quick Trip or Conoco, gas tax is the same. But this is like a shakedown, like where President Donald J. Trump came to two specific companies. This is like a mafia boss in the movies in the 1920s, you know, Vito Corleone, going to a local deli store and saying, you know, you got to pay us this money and we'll protect you. And it just varies from deli to deli what he pays them. So, yeah, it's just in targeting Nvidia and AMD, not Intel. And you might say, well, Intel doesn't have advanced AI chips. Okay, well, fine. It's only 2 chips, right? They're only targeting the MI308 and the H20s. They're not targeting all their other chips. And they have other AI chips. Of course, many of them can't be sold into China, but these would be considered. So I guess the category is the latest and greatest chips, which can be sold into China. So very, very bizarre. And then, of course, President Donald J. Trump, who at times, I say this in the nicest of ways, reminds me of a used car salesman. He's just a grifter. I mean, I don't know what other way to put it. He's up there and he just can't resist it, but he's like, gotta let you know how great of a deal man he is. So he's like, yeah, gonna tell you about this great deal he negotiated where he won. He's so much better than the other side. And you're like, well, who did you negotiate against? What great foreign adversary did you negotiate against? Turns out the great foreign adversary is CEO Jensen Huang of America's largest and most successful company, Nvidia. So not only are we sanctioning our own companies, but now our president is negotiating against them. And so he was just like, yeah, I wanted to do 20% on this, but Jensen Huang, he's a great negotiator. He got me down to 15, and it's like, okay, so he's at 20, he came down 5, and Jensen's eating 15. Who won that deal, right? The guy who wrote the art of the deal. And then he goes on to say, after this, that the chips that we're selling are old chips. So he's just like, oh my God, okay, listen, the Chinese are the smartest people. So they're not dumb. They're not going to be really listening to Trump, but at the very least for optics, wouldn't you imagine that he could say something like, these are great chips? Do your presser that you did for Elon when he was with his Tesla on the front lawn. These are the Tesla, these great Teslers. You're just saying they're old chips. Like, oh my gosh, it was just nuts. It's nuts. But the reason he did that is because that's Trump trying to one up, right? He's trying to put China in their place. Like, oh, hey, not only are we, the government, getting this 15% tax, but you guys are getting our throwaway chips, So it's his whole egomaniac thing that he's got to do, but it's just like, wow, I mean, the executives at AMD and Nvidia just got to be like scratching their head like, okay, this is great. And so the reason, that they got to be scratching their heads is because this chip war that's going on is just, America is fighting it the completely wrong way, right? And understand that I'm not for chip wars. Okay, I have stated on here many times my philosophy, which I created, called MAGA, make the United States, make the U.S. great again by making us great again. By us, I mean the United States working multilaterally with the rest of the world and win-win negotiations, not zero-sum game. So I don't believe in chip wars. But if you're going to fight a chip war, this is exactly the wrong way that you would do it. And China has had enough. So up until this point, Beijing has been the only adult in the room. And they've kind of been, they've been responding to everything, but they've been very polite, very professional. But now they have had enough. And they have come out and they have let it leak. But I think with Beijing, if they let it leak, it would have to be on purpose. That they're sick and tired of these games, right? And so they're advising Chinese firms to not buy the H20. And this is Jensen Huang's worst and greatest fear. And it should be for America. Now, if you are in China, I want you to remember, if you're watching these videos, I want you to remember these videos. Because in 5 years, when you look back and you say, oh, America, those idiots, not all of us were idiots, okay? I'm telling you right now, right here, this is the wrong way to do it. Now, again, to be crystal clear, my personal thoughts would be that we work together to make the best chips, to make the best technology. But if you're going to fight a chip war, this is the wrong way, okay? Because as Jensen Huang has stated, and I've stated many times in this channel, what you would want to do is get everybody on your software stack. Because while the hardware matters, it absolutely does matter. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter. it doesn't matter as much, okay? Which is why Jensen Huang has stated repeatedly, Huawei is right behind us, okay? And he's talking from a hardware perspective, you know? So if we want to win the chip race, we have to get them on our chips while we can so that we control the protocols and American standards are used for the technology, for the software. It's built on American standards. And he is absolutely right. Absolutely. Okay? And so I've talked about this, but I'm going to keep drilling this because this is going to be the inflection point of why America is going to lose this race. Right now, we do have the best software stack in CUDA, or you should say Nvidia does, okay? Huawei has something called CANN, C-A-N-N. Google has theirs, AMD has theirs. Nobody else's stack is as mature, as robust, as reliable, as dependable as CUDA is. Now, a lot of people come in my comments, they're saying Huawei's building out. Yes, they are, and they're doing a terrific job. And this isn't a knock against Huawei. They absolutely have been killing it on everything they've been doing, okay? But the simple fact is that when you look at these type of software stacks, it's not just simply about how great the technology is. It's about how robust, dependable, and reliable these things are. Is the schedule reliable, right? How many breaking changes are coming? And all of these only happen over time, okay? It's just inevitable. You can throw as many people as you want at something. But the only way you get to maturity in this type of thing is over time. Okay, and so Jensen knows that he has the advantage right here. It is their main advantage. In America, this has that advantage, but we won't if we let the time go by, or if we force people to another stack. Okay, because what these ecosystems do is every ecosystem, it puts hooks into you. Okay, so when you have these ecosystems, no matter what it is, imagine that right now, whatever phone you're using, okay, I don't care if it's a Huawei phone or if it's an Android or it's an Apple phone, you're gonna use services from the company. And these services are gonna be very convenient to you because they're very good at what they do. And so for you to change platforms would be a little bit painful. Now the amount of pain varies, right? If you're using Apple and you're really into iMessages and FaceTimes, then leaving Apple is going to be extremely difficult for you, okay? And you might not leave Apple, right? And so this goes on and forth, and that's how they do it. Now that's the consumer perspective, but in business, it's even deeper, right? And some companies just focus on this. So like Oracle has built their entire model upon this, right? Where they go ahead and they just get their hooks so deep into people that like, for a company to rip away, they got to rip their arm completely off. And they're like, I don't want to rip my arm off. And Oracle's like, that's right. Now pay me. And you keep raising fees, et cetera, on them, just extorting people. So Nvidia, they don't do the Oracle method, but they have CUDA. Okay, and CUDA is the most mature, reliable stack out there. And the only reason a lot of the Chinese want the H20s to begin with is because they already have been developing with CUDA. And they already have products out with it. And there's people are using it. So imagine you have your team and you're using NVIDIA's software stack, right? So that means that all your team is set up with NVIDIA's tools. Changing over to another set of tools is not easy. It's an entire paradigm change. It's extremely difficult, okay? It costs a ton of money. It wastes a ton of time, okay? Everybody has to relearn something new. And so that's why it doesn't happen willy-nilly. When you're young and you go into a tech community, right, you're just hopping from platform to platform to platform because you're young. But quickly as you age, you realize, get older, you realize, hey, I'm wasting all my time hopping, learning new things. And you just start saying, okay, here's a tool I'm really good at. I'm just going to stick with this one tool. Because the tool in and of itself, its performance, while it's important, it isn't the most important thing, is how familiar I am and how good I am with this tool, right? So when I look at the JVM and I compare it to Python, the performance of the JVM, maybe a little bit better than what Python is. But for someone that's invested into Python, right, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to stick with Python because I'm really good at Python. And there's no reason for me to go out and learn Java or another language or something like that. Or they might just say, I like this environment. I like the software development environment. So that's the advantage that Nvidia in America has. And right now we're squandering it, okay? Because for this to work, they have to be using the chips. CUDA is only for Nvidia chips. So you have to allow them to get these chips. You have to want them to have these chips, okay? And so by putting export controls or preventing them from getting into people's hands, one, that really ruins it. Two, saying they're old chips, you know, and then putting higher prices on them because someone has to pay that 15% tax. Yeah, Nvidia will probably eat some of it, but they're also going to pass some of it. So my guess is Nvidia could pay for all of it, not likely. Chinese could pay for all of it, not likely. It's going to be a combination, but it's going to raise prices, okay? Right? So again, that's going to lead to less sales. And now you have the Chinese government literally coming out and advising internal companies against using the H20s, going so far as to say that some of them, they're saying you should have a reason that you're telling us that you're going to get these H20s over domestic suppliers. Okay? Think about that. And this is what Jensen's been warning about and what I've been warning about. If we lose that market, right? It's game over. You're talking about handing $30 to $40 billion over to Huawei each, right this year. That number is growing. The entire chip market over in China predicted to be $310 to $400 billion by 2030. And you want us out of that market? And remember, the Chinese don't want us out of that market. Before all this stuff began, before the chip wars began, Huawei was perfectly content to use our chips, to use our OS. They were fine with that. We're the ones that started it. We're going to kill this company. We're going to kill Huawei. We're going to kill ZTE. We're the ones that are going to do it. And then they said, no, you're not. We're going to become self-resilient. And now China's finally like, we've had enough. Okay, we're not going to allow you to put a back door and kill our industries with a kill switch, right? And so, I mean, this is how you're going to lose it. Because here's the thing. Every time somebody goes out and buys the CM384, a 910C accelerator from Huawei, that means they're going to use the CANN software ecosystem. And that means that the CANN system is going to put its hooks into them. Okay? And again, neither NVIDIA or CANN, they're not like Oracle where they try to get these deep hooks. But the simple fact is there's hooks in every system. So once you start using that and your software is built upon it, it's hard to change. There's always pain in changing. You're not going to just change the chip you're using willy-nilly. Okay? It's just the way that it works. It's how it works. Right? So even if NVIDIA has a better chip, which right now they do, once you're got all your budget and your resources dedicated to CANN, more than likely you're going to stick with it. Now, when I say this, understand there are nuances, okay? There are some nuances. So for instance, OpenAI is using, going over to Google Cloud. It's a huge announcement. It was a few months ago. And they didn't say specifically why, but we all know why they're going there. And the simple fact is that Google Cloud has announced its tensor processing units, specifically Ironwood version 7. It might be version 7, yeah. I forgot off the top of my head. Sorry if it's version 6. Version 6, I think it was Trillium. But version 7 of Ironwood, it literally blows even the the Blackwell 200 out of the water. Okay, but there's a reason for that. The reason for it is it's a highly specialized chip. It's really made. So I've talked about this before. I'm going to go over this real quick. I'm going to talk some technical stuff. I'll try to keep it high level. If you're not interested in this, you can forward ahead. But if you are interested, I'm going to give you a quick thing here. So again, we have what are like CPUs, general CPUs, like the x86 system. And so when you look at x86 or ARMs are general also. When you look at these systems, right, they're built kind of like if you have a construction team, they would be like the foreman, okay? So can the foreman probably swing a hammer? I bet he could. can he go ahead and can he take the bandsaw and, cut up a piece of wood accurately? I'm sure he could do that too. But he probably spends most of his time directing the crew, helping out here and there, but directing the crew as to what they do. And so that's what like the general CPUs are made for. And because of that, they don't do specific tasks the best. And Nvidia recognized that back in the, a long time ago. Actually, I mean, it wasn't just Nvidia. We've had graphics cards around forever, for a long time. But it all changed once polygon graphics became like the big thing. A polygon is, a shape like that, and triangle or quadrilateral, whatever. And it has vertices, okay? And so before that, graphics were composed of sprites. So they basically were just like pictures put on the screen. But now what they said, okay, instead of sprites, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate these polygons, which have points, these vertices. And they're just going to be these flat edges, and we're just going to structure an object out of it. So if you're old enough, you'll remember these polygon games where characters look blocky, right? You could actually see the triangular effect to their faces and stuff. But the thing about it is, instead of having this flat sprite to move around, the graphics processing unit was moving around this three-dimensional object, or at least it appeared to be three-dimensional because of the nature of how these vertices work and could be manipulated on the screen. And so this allowed 3D gaming to become really big. And so as the years have gone by, they've added, and they have millions and millions, and now they even have billions of polygons that can be processed, on the screen at one time. But it just so happened for Nvidia that these GPUs that they were making way back in the day, they said, hey, we're just going to make these specialized GPUs that just handle matrices, okay? Because these polygons, right, we don't have sprites anymore. All anybody wants to use is these polygons. And these polygons have, these vertices that got to be manipulated, and we're just going to shove them in a matrix and just do all this matrix math, right? And so instead of making these x86s, they just took and they made these specialized GPUs, right, that just did that matrix multiplication really, really good. And of course, they could do some other things too. And then they said, hey, we need something to leverage this. And that's where they made CUDA. And so CUDA was brought in order to leverage the parallelness of these chips so that you could take all these, millions of chips. Instead of running it through one GPU at a time, you'd run it through 128 GPUs at a time. So you kind of just flow your calculations through it and then just go up to the screen and make all these amazing graphics that you would see in these computer games. Okay? And so that's where CUDA started. And then everything changed in 2014 when Google came out with their paper called TensorFlow. So up until then, AI training had been very specialized, been very CPU intensive. But Google came out and they released this paper that literally changed the world. They open sourced it, so everyone is kind of just the standard of how everyone builds AI now. But to keep it very simple, what they do is they allow parallel matrix calculations that can scale, tensor calculations. So a matrix is a version of a, sorry, I interrupted there. A matrix is a version of a tensor. So you can think of a zero-dimensional tensor as just a number, a scalar, like 5. And you have a two-dimensional, right? So maybe that's just a coordinate. Then you have three-dimensional, so on and so forth, right? And so they wrote this paper called TensorFlow, how you essentially can flow all this together. And what does that sound like? What does that really just sound like what I'm talking about right here? It sounds like what CUDA was built to do. And so while not exactly the same, and if you're watching this and you're, got a doctorate in computer programming, you're like, you're missing details. I'm sorry, I'm just summing it up here. While it's not exactly the same, it's very close, very, very close, okay? And so the modern GPU, NPU accelerators have been built under this idea, okay? But it just so happened that Nvidia had a decade head start, and over some people they have a 20-year, a 15-year head start, okay, before AI really just took off. And it was because of their CUDA that they were using for graphics, okay? Now understand, you might be saying, now wait a second though, You said there was a difference. So doesn't that mean AMD has a weakness? And it does. And that's where Google has exploited that weakness. So their TPUs, their tensor processing units, as the name infers, are made solely for processing tensors. So they do matrix calculations even better than NVIDIA's CPUs. And specifically, what they do is they. So I'm sorry, I'm thinking about how much I want to get into this. I'm probably going too deep, but they have this beautiful thing where they'll take the calculations instead of just NVIDIA runs everything, they just try to cram it. So imagine that NVIDIA has, this highway. Their GPUs are highways, and they just try to cram as many cars into the highway as they can. But what Google did is essentially, and again, if you have a doctorate, I'm probably going to butcher this, so I apologize. But essentially, they said our TPUs are the matrix. They are the calculation. Okay, so even when you have the GPUs do the calculation, but you have to have programming overhead on them, the methodologies that you want to use, how to do this math, it goes through. So just a little bit of overhead, but it has that, right? And then you're just jamming the cars into it. But with Google, the TPUs are actually like the tensor itself. And so they just flow. they flow the information through it. They do it like in pulses, actually, like a heartbeat. And they have a term for it. I forget what they call it. But it has to do with the rhythm. So when they put data through, it's rhythmatically, and it flows through it, and it kind of comes through. And it is the matrix. That's the only way I can think of putting it, okay? But what it does is that if we go back to our construction unit, the NVIDIA GPU would be like a general laborer. So he's better than the foreman at hammering nails. He's better than the foreman at lifting heavy things. He's better than the foreman at cutting wood. But Google comes in and it says, I am just a guy who only hammers and nails. Or maybe you can even say, Google says, I am the hammer and nail. I know that sounds crazy, but it's almost like if you read their paper on it, it's pretty amazing. Okay, so anyways, so Google has that advantage. And that's why Sam Altman, I'm really off on a far tangent. That's why Sam Altman came over and said, hey, they have a 10x performance, in calculations. They have this performance increase also in cost, and so Sam is coming over and they're taking the pain because Sam is on Nvidia right now, but he's saying he's a competitor with Google, but he's saying, hey, we are going to get left behind if we aren't operating at the top level, because what Google does right now better than what OpenAI is able to do is they're able to keep their cost way down. And that's because of these TPUs. So Google doesn't run any of its internal loads on NVIDIA's chips. So and they have been saying that for years. They're like, hey, we will offer, and we have tons of Blackwell, Grace Blackwell, Hoppers, et cetera, for you. You will find the best NVIDIA ecosystems in our cloud. Come over and, we will service you. But for their internal stuff, they don't use any of them. Okay? They're running all their internal service, not all, but most of their advanced AI workloads, could be all of them, are run on their TPUs, on their own TPUs, okay? And so that gives them an extreme cost advantage. And that's where they're able to do things that OpenAI can't. So when you're looking at Google search and you're seeing that quick search overview that you get in AI, think about what that is. They have 1.5 billion people using that. How many times a day? That comes through in like 6 seconds. You might be like, well, it's terrible. Well, it's not going to be perfect. AI is computationally expensive. But the fact that they're able to give you something that's good and continues to get better for free, for nothing, is absolutely amazing. Okay? And so that's got to terrify Sam Altman, right? And I think it does. And this is where people really, they're sleeping on Alphabet in this retrospective, okay? However, this doesn't matter to China because China is never going to get itself stuck into Google's cloud. Google knows that, and so they don't even try. And Google doesn't sell its Ironwood TPUs anymore. You can't purchase their Ironwood TPU, right? You have to use it in their cloud. So it really doesn't matter to Nvidia because they're not offering it. So you might say, well, Sam left. Well, Sam left, but he's not taking his entire workload. Okay. Now there are a downside. Real quick, I'm going to talk about the downside. What's the downside to that? So remember where I said Huawei has CANN, CANN, and Nvidia has CUDA. Well, Google has built theirs completely on open source frameworks, which is good, but it's not mature at all. And it's been noted. I haven't actually used it myself. I've never even tried like just a basic thing on it. I've never even tried it out at all. But from what I've read from other people and I've understand from other people, is extremely difficult to program for, okay, because the paradigm is completely different. So from what I've read, using CANN to CUDA, even though they're different software stacks and they're very different, the methodology is somewhat similar. Moving over to the TPUs on Google is everything's different. You have to think a different way. And again, it's because of how the calculations flow through this matrix is completely different than how it does through a traditional NPU or GPU. Okay, so that was a very long offset, but I wanted to talk about that. Man, I forgot where I was. That was a really long tangent. Sorry about that. But anyways, that is the issue with us not getting, if you want to do a trade war, with us not getting our GPUs into people's hands. Okay, so Nvidia right now, they charge a premium on some of their products. They have a margin as high as like 60, 70%. Absolutely insane. But they're only able to do that. Well, I shouldn't say only able. They're able to do that because of two things. One, they do have the best consumer available chip. So I just got done telling you about Ironwood, but again, that's not available for anyone to buy. The only thing you can do is rent it in the Google Cloud. Two, so Nvidia does have the best chip. Now, Huawei has the CM384, which is absolutely incredible beast of machine. And on this channel, I compared it to NVL72. And I've told you that computationally, the CM384 is on par with NVL72. But even the Huawei CEO, Ren Zhengfei, would tell you it's still behind NVIDIA's top offering. And that's mainly because it doesn't have the performance per watt. Now, in China, of course, it doesn't matter as much, but it is an important metric, as Ren has acknowledged, is still a very important thing. Plus, Ren has also acknowledged that he hasn't directly acknowledged, but I think what he's acknowledging is that what the CM384 did is a little bit different than what NVIDIA did. With the NVL72, you have 72 Blackwell systems, Blackwell processors. The CM384 has 384 910C accelerators, okay? And Huawei leveraged their strength and networking. So they use LPO interconnects, and NVIDIA uses copper, and LPO is light, so they're using fiber optic. And so that allows them to have a physically larger system, and it doesn't degrade like copper does. Copper degrades quickly, or the signal strength and signal transmit time degrades quickly over distance, okay? And so they were able to connect more together. But he would, as he even said, he's a very humble guy. You should listen to CEO Ren if you haven't heard him before. Very humble guy. But he acknowledged they're still working hard to catch up. And so you might say, well, wait, the CM384. Well, what he's saying is they caught up with the CM384, but it's not the same. It's not an apples to apples comparison. It's really apples to oranges. So what he would say when they would catch up, I would imagine, is that when their series of 900 accelerators are on par with, like, say, Vera Ruben, which would be the next generation from NVIDIA, which hasn't launched yet, launch next year, I believe, or in 2028. So that's when I would think he would say. It's like, oh yeah, we have an accelerator, I'm just picking up a number here, 950A, and it's on par with Vera Ruben. That's what I think he would say they're on par, is when on a chip-to-chip basis, not a system basis, okay? However, for a consumer, it doesn't matter too much, especially if you're in China, because again, your cost per watt is much, much cheaper than it is here in America. I just got my electric bill, $200. Okay, I'm paying 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and then we had 18 hours where they pumped it up to like high demand, and it was $1. It's actually like $1.02, right? That they pumped it up. And it's like, oh my God, like what is going on over here? You know, what is going on? Sorry, I got pulled away there for a second. But anyways, yeah, so electricity costs over here are really high. And just so you know what I pay, that's considered low in Wisconsin. So I'm in a smaller area over here. My sister lives in a major area, Milwaukee, and I believe hers is on this like 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So significantly more than I am. If we're at 11%, that's like, 20, 25, 27% more. So a big increase, right? But I think what we pay is too much. $200, just absolutely insane. Our house isn't that big either. So anyways, China's looking at, guys, I'm really sorry. This is my longest video ever. And I went off in that long tangent, so I lost it. But I'm going to try to wrap it up here. China is looking at it now. And for the first time ever, they're saying, hey, we've had enough of this BS. If you're, in China and you're looking at AI accelerators, you're going to have to give us a reason that you're not going to want to use H20s, because here we have these H20s might have backdoors in them, okay? It might have a kill switch. And we have this guy in the White House, this, President Donald J. Trump, who is extremely erratic. And if this is how the U.S. is going to continue on, we don't want to be dependent on them. We do not want to be dependent on them. So look for a domestic supplier. I do think there's an issue with this. The issue is that understand, I don't know this personally. There's no way for me to verify this personally. But I couldn't imagine that Huawei, because we've read the early reports on the CM384 where they already were having an issue with meeting demand. And so I couldn't imagine that they could replace the entire H20 market. That $30-40 billion in advanced AI chips selling this year, could Huawei and other local providers meet that demand this year? I don't think so. I just don't think so. But I guarantee you they are working as hard as they can. And the simple fact is if Trump and America keeps going down this path, then maybe Chinese companies will wait and say, okay, because right now Huawei just open sourced this. So China is looking at all these ways with software to circumvent hardware. Huawei just open sourced a new framework for these high memory chips that come from Samsung and places like that. They're looking at everything, like being self-reliant and everything. They're saying, okay, so we can't make these chips quite at this quality yet. What can we do? Well, here's what we can do. We're going to give you a way through software where, yes, it's not as great as hardware, but will help you to catch up so that if you don't have these chips, you can be close to the performance of not having them on the software that we can offer you, okay, while we're in the process of catching up to these chips. We know that the DeepSeek models of AI came out and they were revolutionary for the fact that they use less resources. And so that's what they're doing, is they're going through and they're refining these models and they're trying to use less resources as they can computationally, but also understand that in the end, it will come down to computational power. That it's always, because even when you do something that's like less resources intensive, right? Then what do? Let's do more of it. It's just a natural thing that you do. Oh, wait, I can do this more efficiently? Well, let's do more then, that's what you always do. So anyways, my word to you guys is that 5 years from now, if China has cornered their own market and just dominate, Huawei and other Chinese companies are dominating the AI market in China, which if they dominate the AI market in China, then they're probably going to dominate in the world. Because the simple fact is that, as we have seen from experience, whenever China perfects a technology manufacturing-wise, they end up going and being like the leading producer of it worldwide. So that would be my guess. But when that does happen, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, you remember this video and me telling you why it happened. Because if you didn't want it to happen, if you're America and you don't want this to happen, okay, you would do everything you could to get our chips into their hands. You would say, Jensen, we're going to give you a 15%, what would you call it? Credit. We're going to give you, AMD, we're going to give you a 15% credit. Get as many of these as you can into their hands. Do not put a back door. Do not build up your ecosystem. Instead, you're taking money away from them. You're taking sales away from them. You're putting the hands of the Chinese competitor into China's hands, into consumers' hands, right? And then don't even think about R&D. You know how much R&D costs in this type of stuff? Like, it's insane. Multiple tens of billions of dollars. And you're taking revenue away from these companies. So, okay. That's what I got for you guys today. Sorry, 40-minute video. Hopefully, you'll keep watching my channel. Sorry about 40-minute video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.